You're listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, where you get valuable information you just can't find anywhere else. To thrive in today's trying times, you need the Financial Survival Network, now more than ever. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and get your free newsletter and gift. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. The date is 4/14/21. War with China. Is China going to take over Taiwan? Is it imminent? And what about what's going on in Russia with the Ukraine, the impending war there, with Ukraine's Western-sponsored efforts to take back the Crimea? Is that going to be just the excuse that China needed? What is China's place in the world? Is it going to be the ruler of the world, or is it going to fail like it has in the past? Well, these are all good questions. I'd like to know your opinion. Why don't you send us an email to kl@kerrylutz.com. Right now, we got our good friend Daniel Joseph on the line. His site is ChinaLearningCurve.com. Daniel, you lived in China for many years. You speak Chinese, and you have a great insight into the mindset of what the Chinese are up to. So with that in mind, we're really thrilled to have you on and give us an idea of what is taking place there.
Yeah, Kerry, good to be on the program again. So we do have some developments here in the last couple of weeks, really longer than that, but that are disturbing. To me, the two we could point at are the increased traffic, flotillas, if you will, maritime militia, they're calling it, in which China is placing large numbers of boats, 200 and more, in some of the disputed territories, waters in the South China Sea, non-military boats, but their activity is so coordinated, it seems to be kind of a coordinated military command. And the idea seems to be to just kind of flood particular areas with Chinese vessels, thereby pushing the vessels of the competing countries out. And so right now, tensions have risen with Philippines over that. And then, of course, we have increased military flyovers in Taiwan, which are raising eyebrows. Both of them combined seem to indicate that maybe China has decided to become more assertive on both issues, which could significantly raise tensions in the area.
And all of their neighbors, none of them are happy with them, whether it's Vietnam, India. They've had some run-ins with India over the past several months. Do they want to bring the whole world down upon them, or are they just flexing muscles to show that we're the big guy now and the U.S. is not relevant anymore? What's the game plan here?
That's a great question. I'm not sure we can answer that with any great specificity. Going back prior to Xi Jinping, you can read a lot of articles that'll tell you that back under the Deng Xiaoping era in the 80s and 90s, relative to foreign policy, Deng's maxim was, keep your head down and bide your time. The point was we should focus on developing our own economy and society and not make too many waves overseas. Now, they've done a great job of developing that economy, but they're still per capita GDP 20% of ours. They got a long way to go. Well, somehow Xi Jinping is the first leader since Deng to turn that on its head. So he wants a more assertive foreign policy. We've arrived. We're a global power. And going back to the beginning of when they started that 6-7 years ago, it seemed obvious that part of the motivation was, well, look, we've got a lot of money, relatively speaking, because we're a large country. We spread that money around. People are going to love us. I don't think it's exactly worked that way. A lot of their, One Belt, One Road initiative infrastructure projects have gone awry, but they seem to think that money will win them friends in the end. But now they seem to be pushing things so far. It's hard to see how they even reconcile that with a strategy of building relations with neighbors. I mean, you've got the boycott of H&M and other European retailers recently. You've got the boycott of Australia. Now you've got the increased tensions in the South China Sea. I just read an article yesterday about election campaigns in South Korea, which the conservatives won. And the Wall Street Journal article is telling me that a big factor of contention there is China, because China has a very high unfavorable rating in South Korea, which, by the way, Donald Trump wasn't the president of South Korea. So clearly it's not just because of Trump that people are worried about China. So China keeps pushing the envelope. I'm not sure. I wonder if they understand the damage they're doing to their reputation.
Or maybe they just don't care. Or
right, exactly.
The stakes have become too large. I mean,
right.
Look, one thing I wanted to talk to you about, and this isn't really relevant to their foreign affairs, but the country's in like big trouble. They've got all these hydroelectric plants, dams, and the flooding in China this past winter really showed a vulnerability there. There were even possibilities that the Three Gorges Dam was going to collapse, but they have so many dams and they're so close to large population areas. Country's really vulnerable. If they have any type of flooding like they had this year, next year, it could be curtains for a large portion of the country. Shouldn't they be worrying about that?
Well, that's kind of the point. It's just so early for them to be flexing their muscles. I mean, not only are they flexing their muscles, but they've got but as you know, you and I have had many conversations. I don't think for many people in the United States, we give China enough credit for the great job they did picking themselves up from the ashes of the Cultural Revolution. And they did that, by the way, by turning to free market economics, not completely, but they did a lot of things right. But now they're not only turning their back on that, but they're standing up and saying, hey, our system is better than yours. How is that even remotely true? It's amazing they're making that claim. They are still a developing country. Between the problem you just mentioned, they have a ton of infrastructure problems. They have a huge pollution problem. They still have a big corruption problem. They obviously, you well know, they have their aging problem. They have so many domestic issues that need to be addressed. It hardly seems the time to be creating these foreign affairs, this big agenda and these potential crises. So I assume they think those other things will work themselves out. But without the economic reform that brought them this far, nothing's going to work itself out. And that's where their biggest problem is. They're not liberalizing the economy at all compared to how they did it in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s.
Yeah, you still got dozens of state-owned companies that are losing money. You've got major banking issues there. Their system's insolvent. They keep injecting more and more currency units in there to try to shore it up, but it's not. It doesn't appear to be working real well. So maybe they're doing the age-old way when things are going bad at home, like concentrate on everybody else and distract the populace. Can that work there?
Yeah, I'm increasingly concerned that that's what's going on, that slowly they're going to realize that the control they want the Communist Party to have is not compatible with continued growth. And they're going to opt for that control instead of growth. So they have to offer the population something other than growth. And what that other alternative is nationalistic achievement. We are a great country. Again, we have returned to the natural state of us being a leader in the world. And look, there's plenty of nationalism deep-seated within China, and for good reason. That's true in any country, but because of China's past and foreign incursions and whatnot, there's a good explanation for that. It's not all because the government manipulates it, but the government has the option to either play that or try to tune it down. In the past, it's tuned it down. Now it seems to be trying to tap into that and turn it up, which is a bad sign for China's neighbors and for the rest of the world. I think ultimately a bad sign for China. Growth will help China in the long term. Achieving these supposed territorial goals and all these things, these are just going to create more problems than they solve.
Yeah, no doubt. And the problems, every country has got huge insurmountable problems that somehow they figure out a way to go on and how to continue. But there's real issues here. And the last thing they need, but obviously they see some type of benefit here or they wouldn't be doing it, would they?
No. And the question is whether, so far it's been, here's the thing that really concerns me. The South China Sea, we talk about rights of navigation, and that's an issue. But I mean, unless there's going to be war, I don't know that anyone's going to stop any ship from going through. Fishing, maybe. Military installations, that's also an issue, obviously. But with our Navy, push comes to shove, I'm not sure how disadvantaged we are. I think that the real hot button in the South China Sea has always been economic rights. Once you trample on the economic rights of the other claimants, you're going to get conflict. So, for example, 4 or 5 years ago, China parked an oil rig in some of these disputed waters off the coast of Vietnam. The Vietnamese rioted, threw stones at and tore down and damaged dozens of Chinese factories, and 3,000 Chinese people working in Vietnam had to be evacuated. That's how serious Vietnamese nationalism is. And by the way, not too long after that, they actually detained a Chinese person in the airport for wearing a T-shirt that had a drawing on it that was the Chinese map of the area, not the Vietnamese. The Indonesians have burned Chinese fishing boats. The Philippines have taken them to the international court. This is a very sensitive issue. If they're showing that they're willing to try to push the other claimants in the South China Sea out of the area and deny them economic rights, I think there's going to be pushback. And what China will be signaling is, we don't care. We welcome the conflict. We accept the conflict. If we get to that point, as opposed to just symbolic demonstrations, we've crossed a line, and who knows what's on the other side of that line, but it doesn't look good.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at it, look what they did with Hong Kong.
Right.
All right. Basically turned it into another province, destroyed freedom there, and really locking people up for basic freedoms that we take for granted here in the West, right? I mean, how does that help them in the long run? It's a warning sign for every country that's out there, isn't it?
Don't just survive, thrive. The Financial Survival Network.
Goldterra Resource Corp is a gold exploration company that has assembled a highly prospective district-scale land position on the doorstep of the city of Yellowknife in Canada's Northwest Territories. Goldterra is currently focused on expanding and delineating gold resources at the company's Yellowknife City Gold Project, with a goal of discovering over 5 million ounces. With ready access to infrastructure and multiple high-grade gold discoveries, Goldterra is on track to re-establishing Yellowknife as one of the premier gold mining districts in Canada. Goldterra trades as YGT in Toronto and YGTFF on the OTC. For more information, go to goldterracorp.com. That's goldterracorp.com.
This is the Financial Survival Network, the information you need to thrive now more than ever.
Well, again, that's a great example. A lot of Americans want to it's typical to criticize China and countries like China because they're not democratic. They need to have elections. I'm sympathetic with the fact that actually elections come later. There's a lot of change. You have to strengthen the rule of law. There are no poor countries that are good democracies. There's a reason why they're not democratic. And I get that. That doesn't mean it justifies everything. They could have gone into Hong Kong. I understand that they're not completely comfortable with Hong Kong. But like you just said, what they did between last year and this year, the national security law, really tightening the screws, going beyond where they really need to go to, quote unquote, control Hong Kong. Like you just said, they're sending a message. They're basically saying, we don't care at all about these values and the system of governance that you take so seriously. And I think they don't, to protect their interests, in my opinion, they don't need to go that far. And it shows a lack of interest, a lack of sensitivity to how the developed world views them, which is why from South Korea to Europe to the US, there's mounting negative opinion about China. And I don't know how that helps them. I don't know why they want to push that button, but they keep doing it.
Yeah, well, they keep, saying it's internal matter and mind your own business and
right.
You have your problems, so don't talk about ours. But they're so hypersensitive. And you mentioned the Uyghurs, the genocide taking place there, and the Falun Gong. Having watched some of these interviews with people who've been in these internment camps, re-education camps, and the beatings and the inhuman treatment that they received, it's shocking, and it's really reminiscent of other evil empires that we've seen there, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Again, I look at it this way. I've been engaged with China since the 90s. So going back to the 90s, obviously economic reform was leading political reform, but believe it or not, into the 2000s, the ability to criticize the government, to have a separate opinion, was actually growing. I mean, it wasn't close to a democracy, and I can understand why. I think the economic reform comes first. The fact that China slowed that down is unfortunate. The fact that they went so far to kind of position, once again, the Communist Party at the center of everything and to demonstrate to their own people that we'll reach out and touch anybody. I mean, they absolutely squashed dissent. Then they go the next step. That would have been bad enough. Then they go the next step and go to the extent they have out there with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, again, going so far over the top, total disregard for what the advanced countries might think, and then to do the same thing in Hong Kong. And you just say to yourself, you don't need to be perfect. We understand that, but they are just going out of their way to make the point. And the point really is this. For the Communist Party of China, their survival is number one. That's what matters the most. And that in the past has always been to the detriment of the actual country of China. And that's the risk right now.
So it's like any other organism in nature. Its first and primary mission is to ensure its own survival and its species, its propagation into the future. And effectively, that's what they're doing here. Is there support in China so weak that they need to do this?
Oh, I don't think it's weak. I think their support's actually relatively strong right now. I think that that nationalist sentiment in China supports a lot of this, and they've got plenty of strength. And I think from the point of view of the United States and our allies, a little pushback against China is obviously required, but by the same token, to a certain extent, that's played into the nationalist hands in China in the sense that people do respond. They don't like to be criticized. They stick up for their country. So I think their support is still fairly strong. But at the same time, those people that are most connected to the economic progress of the entrepreneurs, the business people graduating from college, looking for jobs, they're the ones that are going to first reflect the disappointment as if the economy continues to waver. Right now, it's not too bad because they're still flooding with money. They're coming out of COVID. The question is, where are they going to be in 5 years? And I think that the government might be looking down that road and thinking, well, we need to play the nationalist card more than we have in the past because we're not sure the economic card is going to give us the success we've had in the past because they're not willing to do what it takes. They're not willing to reform. They're not willing to continue to liberalize the economy. They open up different sectors, decrease the state role. That's what they were doing from 1980 to about the mid-2000s. That's basically stopped.
Interesting. And the idea of breaking up or selling off these nationally owned government party-owned companies, like the Army owns like all these companies that have nothing to do with defending the country or its mission. And that's just one example. And you talked about the corruption, which is completely out of hand. We have corruption here. It's bad news, but compared to there, I'm not sure whose is worse.
Oh, theirs is a lot worse. I mean, if you look at the corruption perception index put out by Transparency International, where 0 is completely corrupt and 100 is no corruption, there's basically no advanced developed country, us, Europe, Japan, that scores below a 70, and no poor country, including India and Brazil and other countries that have elections, that score above 40, which means they're pretty darn corrupt. So yeah. China has had an anti-corruption campaign, but it certainly hasn't. I mean, that was part of it was for real, but part of it was political as well. But they have a ton of problems. Kerry, let me give you a statistic that I think your audience will be interested in. According to the IMF, the United States is about 25% of the global economy. China is about 17 or 18%. But if you look in the last year, in terms of foreign currency transactions, 44% were settled in US dollars. Okay. Less than 2% were settled in the Chinese currency, the renminbi. Okay. Now that disparity is despite the fact that China started more than 10 years ago with a program to internationalize the currency because they realized if they're going to be an economy that big, they need to have people willing to hold their currency. The problem is it isn't working. Why isn't it working? Because they have no transparency. They have no rule of law when it comes to how they manage their economy and their currency. There's It's too opaque. So people don't trust the government, don't trust when the government's going to say you can't do this, you can't do that. And so they are extremely reluctant to actually hold the renminbi. I like to use that as an example of the kind of roadblocks China is going to run into if it does not continue to liberalize its economy. They've gotten this far, but to get to the next level where technology and efficient investment matters, among other things, you have to improve on the rule of law, improve on transparency, improve on the enforcement of contracts. And they're just not doing any of that. And it's a lagging indicator because the economy doesn't stop overnight. But when you look at what's happening in their financial sector and that currency, they're failing miserably in a very important area. We talk about the Chinese currency replacing the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Not at this rate. It'll take 1,000 years.
Yeah. The currency and their economic policies are really failing.
Yeah.
So,
and they don't have the bite yet, so they keep going. But gradually, it will come over time.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting that we're really, at this point with them where they're really a threat. I mean, you could make the argument that the U.S. Policies are threats to the world as well. But, we haven't interned people yet, and we haven't started re-education camps, but, maybe we're not that far off. Who knows? For right now, you and I don't have to worry about getting shipped off, do we?
Not yet.
Not yet, but hey, if things keep going. But in any event, hey, Daniel, so the best place to find you still is ChinaLearningCurve.com.
Also, I have another website where I put all my content. It's a content-driven site, theglobalDashboard.com, www.theglobalDashboard.com.
GlobalDashboard.com, and we'll have a link in the show notes to those sites. And anybody with a question or Daniel, just send it to my personal email, kl@kerrylutz.com, and we'll forward it to him. And sign up for a free newsletter, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Daniel, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for being on.
Thanks for having me, Kerry.
Thanks for listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, your solution to today's trying times. For the latest, go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.